So thousands of South Africans rely on buses for long-distance traveling in this country. But according to the Sunday Times, there's been an increase in attacks on these buses as they battle for lucrative long-distance routes. And as that battle intensifies, operators have recorded more than 150 incidents of intimidation, stoning, and in some instances, shootings on buses. Joining us for more on this now is Bazil, Govender, who's the executive manager for the Southern African Bus Operators Association. Bazil, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for making time. How bad is the situation?
Good morning, Ayanda, and to your viewers. Yes, dire indeed. We do not condone any attacks of any nature because the disruption has far-reaching implications. But, over the recent past, we've been getting just the media coverage on the one specific route in the Eastern Cape, and specifically on highlighting the Inter-Cape operations. But I can tell you that this is widespread nationally, and it affects just about every subsector of the bus and coach industry. Scholar learner transport, tertiary transport, cross-border transport, tourism services, commercial contracts, and then obviously your intercity and long distance, all impacted on this. And it's not just of recent, it's been a long-standing issue, which we are grappling with government and the authorities to get some headway.
Yeah. My understanding is that the industry itself is quite well regulated, and it's easy to track whether or not participants in the industry are actually adhering to these regulations. So from your vantage point, why is it taking government so long to intervene in a context where you've explained that this has been long-standing?
Correct. Now, we certainly need to start honing into the systemic issues that are impacting on public transport and sustainability at large. And so we have to start with the current public transport policy. We have had no transition on the policy or implementation for well over 2 decades now. The policies have been in place. Transitioning to implementation and formalization seems to be a real problem within the government entities. If you throw in then, we need to have integrated transport plans and networks in place that would make ease of mobility easier. These plans are drafted, but they fall short at approval and implementation again. And there's generally a misalignment and lack of cohesion between government departments. So if you think about human settlements, spatial planning, safety and security, these are not aligned. They're all operating independently. And critically, I think, and for the viewers and the public at large, we need to have a correct funding model and appropriation of the funding so that transport can be effective and operate. This comes from the public transport operating grant, but that allocation has been capped for years. And this specific year, it has been decreased. So it's placing pressure on proper investment, long-term planning, infrastructure development, and it's all of these impacts on the mobility needs and access for the public at large. And then critically sitting in that systemic problem basket, and the policy says we should have proper transport contracting authorities in place. The policy and legislation prescribes this, but there's a serious skills and competency gap in the various levels of government, provincial and municipal tiers. This is impeding the progress thereof.
Sure.
And as I mentioned, this ongoing misaligned approach, it's frustrating the progress at many levels. And if you notice, and if the public watches closely, there's a myopic view towards getting BRT systems implemented across the country in many cities and municipalities. And there's no regard for the duplication of services and the exclusion of certain sectors. And in many cases, these BRTs are funded with a highly skewed bias as opposed to the existing operators. And then lastly, and I think the issue you're raising today, safety and security, it's more than just intermodal strife that needs to be addressed, Ayanda. There's the issue of crime. There's a recent escalation in incidences of rogue elements getting on buses and holding the bus and the commuters hostage, robbing them. There's the impact of social unrest and community protests. These then overspill into infrastructure and asset damage.
Yeah.
So the correct approach we are asking for is an overarching strategy for violence avoidance. But that's just one issue.
Correct. Let me come in there, Bazil, if I can. I mean, one can visit Park Station in Johannesburg, for instance, on any day to know that these long-distance buses remain, in some instances, the only viable option for mass transit in this country for many people, given the challenges that face rail and PRASA, etc., etc. As far as you're concerned, these acts of intimidation, these assaults, these coordinated rogue elements, as you put it, that enter into buses, to what extent are they deterring people from taking up this option when they travel across the country?
Absolutely, and there are countless examples of this. So essentially what is most concerning is the tendency to want to regulate the bus and coach industry. Now, as you alluded in the intro, this is a highly regulated and compliant sector and has been for decades. Just having people stop buses randomly en route or prevent them from exiting different nodes impacts on the community. And we've had cases where many youngsters have lost the opportunity to get their interviews done, having to traverse different cities because of these types of incidents. We've had people shot and injured. The numbers are just building up. Unfortunately, what is most frustrating is that no one's been brought to book. And it's always a case of these are unidentifiable elements that are bringing about this disruption and attacks.
Yeah.
Now, even more frustrating is within the safety and security sector is to get these issues reported, investigated, tracked, and documented. So therefore, we are calling for a broader, much more intense discussion on how do we start documenting this first of all. And we were calling for simple things, a national hotline, centralized, so that both the community, the commuters, the operators, anyone impacted or affected can report to. At least then we have a source of tracking the data. But it's taking frustratingly too long. And really, we are putting this as an industry at the door of government, all tiers of government. We have tried. We have been frustrated, but we will keep on trying, Ayanda.
Sure.
Because we have the objective of resolution in mind.
Without a doubt, and I don't mean to be cynical at all, but given how long it's taken for anything to take place, I imagine top of your mind is also to try find solutions internally because business has to continue, So with that, I mean, what can you do really, at the very least, to protect your passengers?
Correct. So it's just vigilance and, monitoring from our point of view and trying to also collate data where we can. Always engaging at provincial and municipal levels with the respective MECs and their infrastructure. It's really about keeping the dialogue open. And it's not a case of finger pointing and accusations. It's about working towards solutions. But none of this can be done in isolation, Ayanda. So it has to be a collaborative approach, all stakeholders, all social partners. And for that, we've been calling for the last 2 years, and we'll continue, and we've been intensifying our call for a broader bus and public transport in Durban. Now, the minister afforded this to the taxi industry 2 years ago. We're still waiting for our turn. He has many priorities, but I think this is a pressing one, and we will continue to press the national department and the ministry, and where applicably SAPS and Treasury to be part of the process. And we hope that they come to the table soon. We don't want to discuss this in the media space. We've got to highlight the issue. But I think it's time both the minister and government gave this the serious attention it requires and allocates the resources that are required.
Yeah.
SAPs have come on board. They've allocated some structures and people to try and get the process going. But unfortunately, the department has not allocated their representative for us to do this cohesively and start off the same page.
Yeah. Speaking about discussions that need to take place, what kind of discussions are taking place between bus operators and their taxi counterparts? Because part of what the reports already in the public domain are saying is that a lot of the intimidation actually comes from taxi operators who are competing for routes. But the criticism has been that you can't really compare these kind of modes of transport because on the one hand, one is regulated, the other isn't. One is scheduled, the other isn't. There are completely different cost structures associated as well. So what kind of conversations are taking place there, if they are, in order to find solutions to those problems?
And the stumbling block is that the competing ideologies, from an overarching funding point of view, the taxis have not been funded. Yes, from a regulation point of view, they are not yet regulated. So I think we need to get to that point where there's common goals towards getting integrated transport on a single platform that allows all users accessibility to any preferred mode. But with regards to dialogue between the entities and the modes, they happen at informal levels, but not necessarily one that talks to these issues in the crux. It's more about how do we take the next steps and where are we looking for in terms of integration and inclusion of all modes of transport. But I must stress that, given the failure of PRASA, the bus industry in its current resilience is the only viable, regulated and compliant mass transit options. From 35 to 60 to 140 commuters being moved, whether you have a luxury component, intercity or long distance. We cannot allow it to be eroded because that will be a complete collapse of the public transport system.
Sure. Really sobering that. Bazil, Govender, thanks for your explanation. And I guess all I can say is all the best moving forward, especially when you consider what's at stake. Hopefully the right people were listening to our discussion and will finally do something about this. Bazil Govender is the Executive Manager for the Southern African Bus Operators Association. Once again, thanks very much indeed.